Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another session of Rise Up webinars. The webinar series, which goes ahead and brings together many stalwarts from the startup ecosystem, our supporters, companies who have been working in the startup ecosystem to go ahead and build the ecosystem as one, because we realize that a lot of the partnerships that we build on are necessary to go ahead and provide our innovators the kind of support, not only in terms of mentorships and incubations, but also when they have their product released to take them to the market, to work with established companies, corporations, to go ahead and integrate their products with the challenges that the companies or products are facing, and also in going ahead and ensuring that we build an ecosystem which is inclusive in all its essence and not something which is working in silos. With that, we will like to welcome Mr. Paul Ravindranath. And before I talk about Mr. Paul Ravindranath and the fantastic work he does with startups at Google, what I'd like you to do is also give you a little context on the National Startup Awards. The National Startup Awards 2022 are the third edition of the awards. The awards were first conceptualized in 2020 to go ahead and recognize startups who are not only wealth creating, who are not only generating employment, but also creating wider social impact. A key idea of vital social impact and why it becomes pivotal for us is that we believe that startups by themselves are institutions who can go ahead and provide a very pivotal support to many challenges that we see in communities around us, whether it be tech challenges in going ahead and increasing the ease of access to different resources or services. In addition to it, also it goes ahead and changes the way that we approach a lot of products and services in our lives. With that in our mind, the National Startup Awards 2020 went ahead and identified 36 winners. And among these winners, we had special categories for women, we had special categories for rural impact startups, and for startups who came from campuses. The reason why we focused on these three categories was that we wanted to recognize startups who are working in areas which weren't that explored earlier and who are doing incredible work over there. Following up from that, in National Startup Awards 2021, we went ahead and increased the number of categories that we had. We also had a special categories for support during COVID-19 or innovation for COVID-19. And again, the awards keep going ahead and adapting themselves to the kind of challenges and the kind of solutions that we are looking for. In the same way, in the National Startup Awards 2020, we will also have new categories, one of them being for startups from hilly and northeastern regions, because we believe that the kind of startup ecosystem growth we have seen over the last few years in the ecosystem in northeast and the hilly regions needs to be encouraged to go ahead and see its full potential. We have had startups from the Northeast region who went ahead and participated in Expo 2020 Dubai, also giving them a wider national international recognition. And finally, another addition that we have is for manufacturing specifically, because borrowing from Prime Minister Narendra Modi's vision of Atmanirbhar Bharat, we believe that building manufacturing capabilities within India and services and products which look at it are a key part of how the idea of India going forward, being self-sufficient and being a global leader in all aspects of trade and commerce, is fulfilled. Now, we have with us Paul, who has been patiently waiting with us and has been very kind enough to join us today. Paul has spent over a decade at Google working on various teams ranging from Google search and web spam to emerging markets and developer relations. He currently spends most of his time working with startups and driving for success for startups via Google for Startups programs. And he has been very passionate about working with startups. As Paul was telling me just before we went live, that he was in Delhi like a week before to connect with developers, to talk to startups about the kind of ecosystem that they're building. And specifically, he also has a key interest in building opportunities for women founders and women in tech space. We are very happy to have you here today, Paul. Welcome, Paul.
Yeah, thanks, Benil, for having me. Pleasure to connect here.
Yeah, Paul, from what you were telling me, you have been at Google now for 16 years. That's like a long time. You have seen the company grow, you have seen the company develop from the early years in early 2000s to where it is right now. Now, being a part of one of the world's largest tech companies, in your experience, how would you describe the tech evolution over the last few years? And how do you see that it has impacted the startup growth in itself? Because Google, when it started out, was also a startup. But over the last few years, when Google has established itself as one of the leading technology companies in the world, how have you seen technology landscape itself change and its impact on the startup ecosystem?
Yeah, nice. And thanks for calling out the 16-year bit. I always dig a hole and jump in it when I hear that. I'm a fossil at Google here in India, but privileged to be part of the team here and being able to, work on opportunities like this. But you rightly said, like it's a huge shift in terms of, I call it a generational shift even, right? If you look at 10 years ago, India was mostly known for our amazing tech talent, right? Entrepreneurship was up and coming, but not as hot as it is today, right? So things have undergone a sea change, and the best way to describe it, like I said, is there's been a generational shift, and Indian entrepreneurial kind of the drive is now more stronger than ever before. And if you look at the last 5 years specifically, there's been an increase. There's like a maturing cycle that we've seen, right? And the kind of startups that we are seeing in the country. If you look back not long ago, 5 6 years ago, you look at say taking a Western model and applying it here as a founder. This whole era of kind of Me Too startups, like you try and be the Uber of something, and you target mostly urban audiences. Look at the high disposable incomes, right? So I think we've come a long way from there, and Indian startups are now like sinking their teeth into trying to solve more systemic problems. Problems around healthcare, fintech, and these are far more complex, and also the scope is wider, right? And the audience base is so diverse. So I mean, this shift in India's kind of digital transformation, it's gained momentum, and I think it's captured imagination globally. Everyone's looking at how we are trying to solve for these new and complex challenges. And also, if you look at what happened the last 2 years, the pandemic, it's been a really hard time for all. Well, no one, there were unimaginable challenges, right? Both on the personal level and at the ecosystem level, with founders, with companies. While it had all of that negative connotation, but it also has accelerated, the digital adoption. It's accelerated, the innovation economy in India with massive funding, what we've seen in 2021. So today, I think we're in the midst of probably the most exciting phase of the startup ecosystem, and the momentum. You can really feel the momentum, and India is, I think, very well positioned to be the global leader in the innovation economy.
It's quite interesting, and I agree with you in terms of how the growth of startups, especially maturing of our startups over the last few years, has been incredible, and the way and the challenges that they're tackling is great. I had a follow up question on that. That when we are seeing the kind of, I would say, consolidation of ideas that has happening in the ecosystem, and we are seeing the kind of support that is being given from different parts of the ecosystem to each other. Now, India's growth in itself has been incredible, and in the tech enabled fields especially, we have seen Indian startups go ahead and become unicorns at record pace. Now, when we do compare ecosystems like India and US, where do you think that India is currently with respect to other global ecosystem, whether it be the ecosystem of USA or United Kingdoms and other such countries?
I mean, I think if you just look at 2021, I think it's been one of the most remarkable years for the startup ecosystem. I think 44 unicorns.
Yeah.
It's crazy, right? Compared to what happened just the year before that. $77 billion, I think, is the projection, the amount invested in 2021. 62% growth compared to the year before that. $30 billion went to early stage to growth stage companies. So the way I look at it, I think these numbers are just a manifestation of this maturing cycle that I spoke of earlier, and this generational shift, the ambition amongst our startups, and the problems that are in front of us, and having the technology to now go and solve for them. I think that drive is really really strong, and there's a lot of shift to digital first and leveraging technology to go digital first. So I think while these founders are solving for India, essentially, like, this is solving for the world. Right? So I think there couldn't be a more important year, through the pandemic season and what we've seen in terms of maturing, to kind of underscore and highlight what our founders are capable of. Right? There were, of course, founders hit by this whole pandemic season, but how things have turned, especially in the sectors that are have gained super momentum. I think the way the founders are gone after solving for them is like incredibly inspiring and ably supported by the ecosystem, right? Like the investor community, the mentoring ecosystem around everything has kind of doubled down on this.
Yeah, that's great. And adding on to what you said about unicorns, in the 3 months till now already we have had 14 unicorns in India. So it looks like again that this would be a great year for the unicorns. And something that you talked about, which was very interesting, is in terms of how digital first approach by our startups in terms of how they're building products is there. Now, as a technology company which was always innovating to go ahead and adapt to the new circumstances, and also which leads the technological approach in multiple fields, what do you think is the right approach to digital transformation and tech use for startups?
I mean, in a word, it's about having a nurturing ecosystem, right? So I think India has done incredibly well to build a community, support community around startups. The ecosystem that we are in, the fact that we're having such rich conversations here, we have an awards ecosystem over there, and generally like how founders are matured. If you look at it, we have founders, first generation founders who've exited or been successful or are at the top of their game actually contributing back, giving back to the ecosystem, helping up and coming founders, helping them to kind of start up, learning from the mistakes they have made, right? That's a sign of a very healthy ecosystem. And even companies like us has invested in supporting these communities for over a decade now. We have on the ground more than 50, 60 developer groups, in right from the metro cities to small towns, helping developers learn how to build, and they then become employable amongst really innovative companies, right? We've had programs focused on startups like the Google for Startup Accelerator or Google for Startup Partner Program, where we work with communities out there and enable mentoring across the network for founders. And this has been in existence for many years. Like initially, just in the metros, maybe we were very popular in Bangalore, or we had a lot of startups coming and taking advantage of this kind of community in Delhi or in Bombay. But it's not true anymore, right? You're looking at tier 2 India, tier 3 India, founder ecosystems popping up. You mentioned Northeast in your in the beginning of the call of this particular broadcast. So I think it's really exciting to see how entrepreneurship is being embraced. So when you talk about digital transformation and startups approaching tech, it's also about having this supportive, nurturing ecosystem that's not just limited to a few watering holes, but is accessible and available to all. And it's also great to see like government doing so much more to support the growth of these communities. And we are partnering pretty deeply with state central government initiatives to land some of these community based programs, mentoring based programs, skilling kind of initiatives amongst folks out there.
Okay, so it's quite interesting to talk about how nurturing an ecosystem works and the programs that you're running, because then that brings me to the next question in terms of how, while India has seen massive digital adoption, what is the role of startups in going ahead and spreading digital literacy and like getting people attuned to the use of technological softwares on their own in tier 2 tier 3 cities? Because as you rightly pointed out, India currently has a boom in the number of startups who are coming from tier 2 tier 3 cities. According to DPIT registered startups, there are 46% startups who come from tier 2 tier 3 cities, and that's unique in itself. For it shows you the business opportunities available, and it also shows you that for innovation a lot of the ideation that is required was already present. It was going ahead and providing them mentorship and other opportunities. With that specific concept context in mind, what role do you see startups playing in going ahead and increasing the digital literacy within the country in the years to come forward, and adoption of technology solutions beyond your tier 1 cities, as you said?
I mean, if you think about it, if you're a founder solving for India today, you don't have a choice, right? Who's your new audience? Like, who are these people that are coming online? Who are these people that are suddenly now using a Google Pay, or to pay for bills at a like at a kirana shop, right? These are people who've now adopted Google Tech or have been forced to do so because of the whole pandemic scene that happened in the last 2 years. But the question is more about like how do we ensure equity, right? It's about how do we make sure that technology is available, accessible, affordable, and people know how to use it, to address your point about literacy, right? If you take a look at our approach to this, like Google's approach to this is essentially like it comes down to our core mission as a company. It's about making technology, knowledge accessible and useful to everyone. And Google has been in India now for almost 2 decades, and all of our efforts are focused on making internet more accessible, more helpful, safer for a billion Indians, right? This means overcoming challenges on infrastructure, enabling supporting ecosystems. I spoke about the different community aspects that we've been working on, and digital literacy in rural India, amongst women in rural India. And these are the areas where I think not just Google, but the ecosystem at large has been focusing on to really push forward. And Google has been kind of at the forefront of that with programs like the Internet Sathi and other programs that we have for women founders. Besides this, we've also done a few other things like the Google India Digitization Fund, where we set aside specific amount of money that was announced by Sundar recently, to help drive more of this. Like India is a country with diverse languages, right? How do you solve for that? How do you solve for the next billion users that are going to come online? How is AI and its role going to be important? And how does Google itself invest in teams and in approaches to build products for India? I think all of these hold good for founders as well, on how can you make your product more available, more accessible, affordable, and at the same time people should know how to use it, right? So the importance of user experience research, understanding your user journeys and personas, understanding your user fundamentally is so important as you build for like this new digitally transformed and digital first world in India.
Yeah, it's like a very good food for thought in terms of how user experience should be at the center of how we are going ahead and building our resources. And that also brings me to something which you said is also your interest space in terms of women entrepreneurs, right? A lot, we know that most tech products that we are building are going to be used by everybody. But we also see that the number of tech women founders, especially at the CXO levels, while it has been rising, we can see a lot of areas where it can rise further. Now, while we do have partners who go ahead and support programs, the National Startup Awards also has a very specific category which looks at women entrepreneurs and awards specific women entrepreneurs for their work, provides them mentorship support, as you highlighted earlier, which is necessary for startups to grow through different mentors in the ecosystem, provides them with investor connect, provides them with going ahead and being able to be a part of international engagements like Expo 2020 Dubai. The DPIIT delegation, which went to Expo 2020 Dubai, had 70% of the selected startups were from women founders. Now, when the ecosystem is working towards a lot of these issues, right? What are the further steps that we can do to not only encourage women to be in tech, but also go ahead and make space for them at the top of the hierarchy, at the CXO levels, at the like top of the organizations, and give them opportunities to be leaders. Like, what are the factors that you think will work towards it, and how is it that you have already seen the ecosystem adapt to it?
Yeah, I mean, Rome was not built in a day, right? I think this singularly everyone understands as a problem, right? And it's probably like me preaching to the choir, because you guys have been doing such incredible work that you just articulated. So congrats on that. And I think everyone needs to find ways to contribute to moving this forward, right? Um, if I just take a look at capital raised, if you are a women only founder, solo women founder, if you look at all the deals, I think between 2018 2020, just a 2 year period, I think less than a 1.6% went to women founded companies. If you look at that same period, but you say you're a woman co-founder, such companies, it was about, I think, 3.5% or so. Very clear that it's an area that we need to look at. Not only this, if you study a little bit and read some of the published research and reports out there on what women founders want, like what are the areas where they have needs. It boils down to a few important areas, like just simple things like access to really good mentors, right? How access to trainings or an understanding of how to pitch better, like how do you do better fundraising, right? Those are some fundamental questions they deal with. And not only that, for founders that we work with, it's about how do you get or how do you build a great co-founding team? How do I go find my co-founder? or how do you build great tech teams and have this amazing idea. Many of them aren't necessarily, many of the women founders at least that I've interacted with, not necessarily from a tech background. They have an incredible idea and an incredible solution. They're trying to build a team. So that's where they kind of are stuck as well. And if I look at other data, like there's so many supporting programs out there, accelerators, incubators. If I just look at the Google for Startups Accelerator program and I go back a few years and look at the applicant pool, right? How many women founders are applying to the program? That number was in our first 2 years when we started in 2016. In our first 2 years, that number was like around 10% or less applicants, right? And it required a lot of me asking a lot of questions to folks who applied saying, why did you apply? And for others who had heard of us and hadn't applied, asking them, why did you not apply? And almost always the answer was around, I don't think I was ready, or I will apply for the next time because my product is not mature enough. So it's also about, we see a lot of bullish tendency amongst founders who are male to just apply, and then let's see what happens, right? But with women founders, looks like they wait for a little bit more of a complete product, and they hesitate to kind of take help. So some of these things also are data and research, and some of the focus group discussions we've done with applicants reveals to us. So this requires a slow burn approach, not just by Googles of the world, but by the ecosystem at large, to build programs of support, to nurture founders, to build hero stories, to show more and more intent, to boldly support initiatives that push forward, women founders and women in tech in general. And this is exactly what we're doing. I think with our Google for Startups Accelerator, we're adding on a focus for women founders. You might have heard of our initiatives around Startup Clinic, which essentially focuses on mentoring women founders at scale, and several other programs, including Women Tech Makers at womentechmakers.com, that focuses on helping women in tech, developers, tech leaders to come out there, be part of the community, and inspire other women to start up, to come join the industry. So I think this is a very, very important thing for us as an industry to focus on. And while many people do already have programs around it, I think we need to have a more collaborative approach as an ecosystem to move the needle on this.
No, I think like you raised some very important points in terms of how we go ahead and engage and the kind of apprehensions that might be setting in at a point of time when a woman entrepreneur is applying. And it's great to see the work that Google is doing with it, because I think the last bit of it that you said, where we said that the ecosystem has to come together, is one of those key things that we are also trying to build. We have trying to build with different partners. We have been trying to build with different partners because at the end of the day, we do need all our innovators to come forward, regardless of their gender identities, regardless of where they come from, and it's something that we are continuously working towards. It's also very like it brings me to a question in terms of when we do look at our startups and the way that they're developing, right? Because that's one of the key things that we were discussing right now in terms of how like women entrepreneurs, from what you have seen, also wait for like say a finished product, or take a lot more time in terms of going ahead and accepting that the product is good enough to go ahead and be pitched to an event as compared to the male co-founders. So in that point of time when a company is building starting to build its function, right, we have seen the rise of cloud computing, we have seen the rise of machine learning and AI and big data, changing from buzzwords to something which we now see happening every day in our lives. Like I remember when I was in college, which was, now that I think about it, ages ago, but how the idea of what cloud computing was or machine learning was seen as one of those revolutions which will come, but we weren't sure how it's going to look. But over the last 5 6 years, we've seen how it's become an integral part of all technologies that we use. Now, what are the impacts of these kinds of new technologies in the making and functioning of a company, and how do you go ahead and integrate them within your companies, and how do you see that this has changed the ecosystem in the last few years?
Yeah, and this comes back to, I think, the question you'd asked, right up top, around the generational shift we've seen as
Yeah.
an ecosystem where we're trying to move. We're seeing a move towards founders solving for more complex problems in fintech and agri-tech and healthcare. Now, innovations in these spaces with the kind of complex and diverse user base wouldn't be possible without these kinds of technologies like cloud computing, ML and AI, big data, like large complex sets of data being generated. How do you work with this and make sure that you deliver experiences that are beautiful, that are seamless for people that are first time users of the internet? Like maybe so your solution you're working on targets people in tier 2, tier 3 and rural India. How does that look like, right? So without the benefit of machine learning, without the benefit of cloud computing, some of these innovations would be much slower. I think would scale much in a much slower fashion. So scale and speed, are kind of important when you think about cloud computing, ML, AI, big data, and also the impact, right? So imagine, like I'll take the example of a startup called Niramai that was part of Google's Accelerator program a few years ago, solving for early breast cancer detection, right? Early stage breast cancer detection. So beautiful solution where you're able to take a picture and apply some MLAI on it on a thermal image, and within a matter of seconds, the ML model with an accuracy of more than I think 98% predicts whether or not you might you're prone to have early stage breast cancer, and that's an incredible, amazing solution. When you can compare the alternative, which is a traditional mammograph, there's a lot of effort involved in getting to a healthcare facility to do that, and so on and so forth. But the point is, it's the beauty of the technology that now helps you to solve healthcare problems at a whole new level that you never thought of. Or if you think about share chat, which is an amazing company in the social space in India, right? um, they were part of our accelerator when they were just a seed stage company, and they were still making choices on their architecture. They were still making choices on how do we build something for scale. And when I look back at how big they are now and how they were then, I'm sure that the tech architecture choices they made help them to reach like billions of users in India today, right? And cloud computing, yeah, that's the reason why they're a billion user company, right? So I think without a doubt, anything to do with cloud, ML, AI, I think it's going to be a core part of any solution that's focused on India.
It's quite interesting that you mentioned Niramai because Niramai was also a National Startup Award winner in 2020 in the health diagnostic category. So we do see a lot of synergies in terms of the approaches to the startups also we are taking, where startups who are innovating for solutions which make accessible, as you said, things like health tech, fintech, which are systemic needs of the country, which are systemic needs for the globe. It's just fantastic to see the alignment also in terms of the identification of talent that is happening across the startup ecosystem. And I think that also leads us to a very important question in terms of how is it that you see the technology industry changing in the next few coming years? We see that there's a larger shift towards blockchain. The DPIT recognition certificate itself now is stored on the blockchain so that it's easily accessible to a lot of people. We see that the ideas of how privacy and data usage is coming into play, and there are newer policies that companies are building towards trust and safety, going ahead and looking at content, looking at going ahead and ensuring that the platforms within themselves are moving towards a direction which makes it safe and accessible for everyone. So what are the key factors that you think are changing in the industry next, and what is the next big thing that you think will come in the technology industry?
Yeah, I mean, great question. I think the pace of change and adoption is exhilarating, right? And on so many levels. I think we are at the forefront of change. I think we'll see a continued scaled adoption of digital commerce, obviously, digital payments, edutech, is transformed completely in the last 2 years. Healthcare, with all the great examples we discussed, agri-tech, I think these verticals are going to see really strong growth. The role of ML and AI, like we discussed, is going to continue to evolve to solve for and accelerate these kinds of quality related challenges, especially in healthcare, and even in digital payments, addressing some of the privacy, security issues. All of those things are open challenges out there for the ecosystem to address and solve for. And as an industry, I think it's incredibly important that while we focus on scaling the growth of tech, we should also invest in more responsible growth. It and take everyone along, right? We spoke about digital literacy. Like the digital transformation journey is new for a large chunk of these people who come online. So if you think about what's next for the tech industry, it's not just about growing user base, but also being responsible about how they use products, how they learn about tech, and really enable them to use it more effectively. And an important part of all of this, which we not necessarily focus on when we just talk about startups, is startups are made of people. Right? Startups are made of really strong engineers, really strong CEOs, leaders. I think India will make progress in this new wave if we also focus on the job side of things, right? So skilling, it's not just about creating jobs. Startups are going to create a huge amount of jobs. There are a lot of new economy jobs coming our way. But what does a talent look like, right? How can we invest in the talent to make sure they're more employable, right? And how can startups and the ecosystem collaborate to build just more employable talent force right across the board? And not just in the Delhis and Bangalore's and Mumbai's of the world, but across India. I think they are going to be a critical contributor to what's next for the tech industry, because those are the future employees of every other startup that we're talking about that's been funded or will be funded soon. So I think it's important to also focus on job creation and employability.
Yeah, so it's quite interesting that you talk about job creation because now we've seen the rise of startups which are also acting as aggregators for jobs in markets beyond tier 1, tier 2 cities. And when we see this technology being developed, we know that Google Pay was one of the first movers in going ahead and adopting UPI, which has been a boon to my life. But also because Google Pay doesn't allow you to change, I'm stuck with the juvenile name I choose at the beginning. But when Google is at the forefront of going ahead and leading this adoption of technology, how is it that Google is initiating these changes, or how is it that you are going ahead and influencing, or rather more than influencing, paving the pathway for more of these startups, specifically in the newer technology domains to come?
Yeah. I mean, that reminded me of my very first. I'll have to just move a bit so the motion sensors turn on the lights. It reminded me of my first email ID, which was something to do with James Bond and some random numbers, which I don't use anymore. But I guess the question is, how has Google been part of this technology change, right? I mean, Android and Google Cloud Platform. I think we've invested so much in these areas to enable founders and startups to innovate, and not only just the technology platforms, but our investment in programs that help developers and startups to really enable and embrace these platforms to the fullest extent, to unlock the potential that they have to offer. So we have an incredible amount of investment, human capital and otherwise, going into making sure these platforms are fresh, going into making sure that we have a ear to the ground in terms of understanding what do developers and founders want from these platforms as they innovate, as they implement ML models that scale, as they gather massive amounts of data that can be used so incredibly to personalize content and target people who are even like first time internet users. I think it's a combination of our strong investment in these platforms, and not only these two but the others out there as well, and support programs for developers and startups together, that kind of underscores our I would say core mission in India is to take everyone along, right? To make sure that the technology is accessible to everyone and that we are able to build or make change in everybody's lives.
Yeah, like, and I think like the way that Google has become an integral part of our lives, and the way I remember like its first usage in terms of an Android phone, and I still use an Android phone, is because of the ease of access that it builds. And within that ease of access, like one of the key things, and I just want to go back to a few questions, right? We discussed
Sure.
about how like building in tier 2, tier 3 cities, the programs that Google Accelerator is doing in tier 2, tier 3 cities, and how you're identifying a lot of talent in there, right? Like identifying talent, helping them develop their ideas. Does Google also envision itself as a key player in helping them scale, in helping these startups? Because you talked about Niramaya and you talked about ShareChat and how big they have become now. So, what role does Google see itself playing in the startup scalability and becoming the next big, uh, I would say, disruptor in the ecosystem?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think it's about having a holistic approach, right? It's not just enough that you have an incredible platform that startups can scale on, like from a business perspective. It's about creating a nurturing ecosystem to enable them to understand how to scale better, right? So that kind of underscores our focus on not just making sure we have very strong on ground developer communities. So our Google developer groups program, our women tech makers program, our Google developer experts program. So some of the audience might be part of our communities or might be curious to know what they are. So if you go to Google, developers.google.com/community, you'll know and understand how deeply at the grassroots level we are connected with the developer ecosystem, right? So this helps us truly understand what developers need and try and build programs around helping them to build better or build really amazing technology solutions. And these developers work in startups, in companies, and that really helps them to leverage and integrate into our platforms and scale that really, really well. In addition to that, if you just look at our startup focused programs, Google for Startup Accelerator, we have 116 graduates over the last 4.5, 5 years, with more than $2 billion in fundraise, and with some of the companies that we called out as examples today. I think an incredible journey in terms of offering mentorship and great feedback coming from the ecosystem on the value that this program offers. Beyond just the platforms that we have, these programs provide a shot in the arm and help create hero stories, right? So many of the startups we engage are at the seed stage or pre-series A stage, and today you can see some of them doing really well. It goes to show that the right input at the right time really helps you to scale as a startup. So it's a 360-degree effort in to move the innovation economy forward in India. That's why Google has not just invested heavily in the platforms, but also on these programs that help us to move everybody forward.
Yeah, and it's great to see the work that you have been doing. It's been incredibly fun to talk to you about it also, because I think that's one of the things that we do also need to engage in a lot more as an ecosystem of learnings from each other. The Rise Up series has been Startup India's efforts in going ahead and spreading that information across the ecosystem about programs that other partners are doing, and in addition to it, what we can learn from the growth journeys of corporations like Google, which started as a startup. And I remember was one of the first startup stories anybody would ever hear till the 2000, 2005s, and talk about how well it was built and where it was built from as a project initially to where it is now. And that also brings me to one of my few final questions in terms of like we see that say the National Startup Awards play an active role in going ahead and not only recognizing what the talents are, but also providing them hand-holding support. Now, when we are looking at mentorship, we are looking at investor funding and things like that. What role do you think? How much do you think, in terms of the impact, is something that partners to coming together creates, and how much do you think that we can go ahead and create when we do work with startups directly? The reason why I'm asking is that there are two different spectrums to this in terms of building programs at a micro scale and building programs at a macro scale. What kind of synergies do you see between partnerships between government entities and private players, which, as you said, you have been working with state entities, that you see as the most encouraging signs for times to come?
Yeah, I mean, like they say, like two heads are always better than one, right? Everyone has blind spots in their understanding of different problem spaces and how you might solve for them, and that's why it's so important to encourage really strong collaboration quotient in the ecosystem. So being open to collaboration is like I think is one of the things that Google is that defines some of the approaches. We have an attitude and intent to give back to the ecosystem, to grow with our founders, and to build programs that that can really work well for all. And to that extent, yes, we do look at active partnerships. Like we have the Google for Startup Partner Program, specifically looks at looking at accelerators, incubators, and other entities that have a very founder first approach to grow and nurture ecosystems across. And we look at partners across the board, partners who are working closely with the government, partners who are working in the tier two ecosystem, partners who are working, say, in the SaaS space or specifically focused on women founders or in academia. So we look at a diverse set of folks that are solving for these ecosystems and try and partner with them so we can bring the best of Google, our people, technology, platforms, resources, to the on ground approaches, like grassroots level approaches that these folks are already, they have a deep understanding of being in a tier 2 space, or working exclusively in academia, or working exclusively amongst SaaS founders. I think that kind of expertise will only be second hand knowledge to us because we build large programs. So collaborating with partners out there, we hope to kind of go deep and really make sure the value is felt, even at a founder in Hubli in Deshpande Foundation, who's a partner with us, who can get access to the best of Google through that partnership.
So that's wonderful, Paul. Like, and it's also been incredibly great to understand the diverse set of work that you're doing. I think at some points we have Google so integrated in our lives that we do completely forget. Hey, listen, they're integrated through different partnerships and different programs, and that's the reason how we have, like, Google for us has been able to reach as far as they've been able to reach, and it's fantastic to see the journey that you have had, and which also like makes me quite curious about you as a person. And I just wanted to ask you a few things, if you don't mind, about what are the few
Sure.
things that you like doing, say for example on a daily basis, which do keep your energy going through the day, or at a point of time when you see that a task is something that might take too much time, what are the two three things that you do which help you focus through the day and help you work on things?
Well, I'm father to a pandemic baby who's just turned 1. So she keeps my wife and I on our toes. And yeah, like if I'm having a tough day, like I just go back home to my daughter and she kind of cheers me up. So that's been a really nice thing. Other than that, yeah, like we have an incredible team at Google, and we feed off of each other's energy and passion for solving for this ecosystem. So it's been fun working on different kinds of teams at Google, and I think the most fun I've had and the most close to impact, feeling the impact that I've ever been, has been working on startup programs. So I'll always be, it'll always be something that I'll continue to try to look forward to every day when I wake up.
I think that's great for us in the startup ecosystem because it makes sure that we have a partner who's deeply ingrained in it. Another thing I wanted to know was that what are the a few hobbies that you have, and I am not sure how a pandemic baby does impact your hobbies and activities. But what are the few hobbies you have? What do you like to pick up, or even do with your family and your baby at this point?
I got asked a question in another interview on like what is one skill that you picked up through the pandemic, and I was like, I can change a baby's diapers in a minute. Uh, but besides that, like, yeah, I love music. Listen to a lot of it. Um, Many eons ago, I used to play the guitar and be part of my college band, but my guitar is gathering dust now. But I think music is always something that I go back to and keeps me up.
Oh, that's fantastic. Now, I think with your daughter, you will be able to pick it up again and teach her what you learn. And it's fantastic to see the kind of joy you are having in terms of like the things that you're doing. It was fantastic to talk to you, Paul, today. Thank you so much for coming. We will be working closely together in the future, and we do look forward to the impact that you will be creating in addition to all the work that you're already doing, because we have had a lot of great success stories with the startups that both of us have been working with. And that also brings me to the National Startup Awards. The National Startup Awards applications will be closing on the 15th of April. And I would request all startups, incubators, and accelerators to apply for the awards. Please go through the website, apply to the categories you think you're best suited to. In case you have any queries, please reach out to us. You can also on our website go ahead and see the kind of impact and handholding that has been given to startups from previous editions, one of whom Paul himself mentioned, Niramai. And we see that these are startups who are going ahead and making impactful change in the world. And we believe that Indian startups are going to create locally for a global world where our products are going to be the next change and phase of the global economy. So it's great to have you here, Paul. I'm very happy that I could have this discussion for you, and thank you for taking your time.
Feeling is mutual. Thanks for having me, and yeah, encourage all startups to apply to the program. You guys are doing some really cool work.
Thank you. Thank you for all our audience members also. And with that, we'll all be signing off. Thank you, everyone.